We are streaming live on 5 different platforms. If you're only looking at this from one platform, you're doing it wrong. And I'll let you know all these other platforms you can check out, just in case you want to check out the live stream from other locations. This is streaming from my individual, personal Facebook account, my personal Twitter account, my personal YouTube account. But this is also streaming from the Facebook page for the Educational Freedom Institute. If you haven't followed that page, you better go right ahead and check that out right now, especially if you're already watching on my personal Facebook page. Go over to the Educational Freedom Institute Facebook page and check it out as well. And then also it's on the YouTube channel of the Educational Freedom Institute. So you can check it out from any of those 5 platforms at the moment. And what I really want to let everybody know while people are still hopping on, I'm not going to answer the question of what a micro school is, because that's what we're going to get into with Kelly Smith, the CEO of Prenda Microschools over in Arizona. We'll talk about it in a second. But I want to let everybody know that we don't want to just talk to ourselves here, even though, Kelly's an extremely awesome guest and super interesting guy that he'll have awesome things to talk about today with the micro schools going on with the Prenda micro schools. But we also allow for comments to show up on the bottom of the page. They'll show up, hopefully a little bit below Kelly's face, so that if your comment is too long, it'll cover him up. So I'll try to keep it short, and it'll be at the bottom of the page, and we'll be able to respond to your questions directly, and we'll be able to feature them in the show. That's a bonus, I would say. Whenever I saw someone else using this software and I saw the comments showing up and I was on Facebook, this was actually Chris Stewart's. Chris Stewart's an amazing guy. He's over at EduPost. I actually just wanted to pop up onto his stream just so that my comment could be featured at the bottom. So I figured that we would do that with our streams as well. So make sure you're commenting, and we'll be able to feature your comments. We'll be able to respond to your comments. And, if you just want to let us know your thoughts, we'll be able to feature those as well. And so it looks like we have a pretty good amount of people that have hopped on to the call already. So yeah, Matthew Nielsen, can you take it away with some quick introductions, and we can get into this discussion?
Yeah. So I'll start just with the formal introductions here. And I do have some announcements later on, but I'll wait for those. I'll push them to the end. So I'm Matthew Nielsen. I'm the board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute. Corey DeAngelis joins us as always. He's the executive director at EFI, and also the director of school choice at the Reason Foundation and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Our special guest today is Kelly Smith. He's the founder and CEO of Prenda Microschools. And I'm sure he has a longer bio than that, but my Facebook stalking skills aren't quite up to snuff, and I haven't been able to find much else. So you have to tell us more about yourself, Kelly. But that's what I got on you, and we really appreciate you coming on to talk to us.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me, you guys.
You bet.
I'm a fan of the show. I've listened to several of the episodes.
Cool. We appreciate that. We're glad to have you on. And maybe, Kelly, we like to, if you've listened to a couple of these, usually we like to ask just an initial question that pretty much stays the same from show to show. And that is, if you could please tell us more about how you got interested in education and a little more about yourself as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's always interesting to hear people's journey. Mine is one of, I've kind of liked the process of learning. I remember being a teaching assistant in physics, for example, and I would wear this special vest. It was like a cloth, maybe a cotton fabric vest, and it had the word physics embroidered over the chest. And I remember feeling proud wearing that vest and walking around with my whiteboard markers, and people would come in this lab and ask me questions, and I got to help answer their questions. But I always had this secret mission, which was to help them appreciate how awesome physics is, right? So I would stop my explanation of this particular homework problem and be like, but do you see what this means? Like the farther you get away, like the gravitational pull goes down by like the square of the distance. And people always just looked at me with rolled eyes. And particularly the medical students would be like, how does this give me a grade and get me into med school? You know, like they didn't really get into it as much as I did. But I love the process of humans learning. I made what I joke about as a pretty superficial decision to not be a teacher, even though I love that stuff. And it was really all about like, I wanted to have a family. I was already married at that point. And, I felt like I would go find something that would make more money. So I joke that I've lived with the shame of that superficial decision ever since. I went into technology. So I studied nuclear physics at MIT. I was working on magnetic confinement fusion, which, if you're curious, those of you at home, doesn't work yet. And after that, I left to do some consulting and worked for a number of technology companies, mostly in the space of energy and helping buildings use energy more efficiently, things like that. I sold a small software business when I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and working for a big company. And when I sold that business, the new company was remote, so I was able to work from anywhere. And my wife and I had that conversation. 4 little kids, and our families are both in Arizona, so moved back to my hometown. It's a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. And with some time on my hands, I decided to start teaching kids computer programming as a purely volunteer initiative. So this was me at the library with my own kid and friends, kids. And then I'd put up posters around. There's like a low-income neighborhood near the public library in downtown Mesa, Arizona. So I thought, maybe one of these kids would take to coding and go get a job, and it would be good for them and their family. So that was my sort of stumbling into education. It was never meant to be a business or a school or any other organization. I just thought, what if we can help some kids learn? But what happened was that turned into a laboratory for me, where I was trying things and watching the process and really just trial and error, getting to a place where I learned some things about how kids think and how kids learn. And it was really a great experience. I did it basically every week for 5 years. I was in this lab with kids, working one-on-one with lots and lots of children about how to learn computer programming. And at some point I said, what if we did school this way, the model itself? And that was the beginning of me kind of stumbling into microschools and education.
Yeah, so let's get on that. I know a lot of my listeners are just thinking, what the heck is a microschool? I even titled the title of this video is "What are microschools?" with an exclamation point and a question mark. So yeah, can you get along a little bit? Can you tell us about that connection between the coding and then to microschools, and then what's Prenda? You're the founder of an organization called Prenda, and is that like a private school, public school? Is it a charter school? Can you give us all that background?
Happily. So a microschool is a term that I did not invent, but a lot of people have started using microschool just to mean, as you would expect it to mean, a smaller version of school. Some people, refer to microschools that are up to 50 or 75 kids. To us, Prenda, a microschool is between 5 and 10 students, typically similar in age, and they meet in an environment that's informal. So often this is in somebody's house, in a back classroom of a church, in an office, a spare room at an office building. It's less about the physical facility, and it's more about this group dynamic where there's a group of humans coming together for the purpose of learning. And for us, it's important to talk about why our mission is empowering learners. And so if we can create a small, safe, informal environment where kids can be ignited as learners, not physically ignited. I realize I'm on the internet here talking about lighting children on fire. That's not what I want to do.
Don't do that.
I want their brains to be captivated and immersed in the effort of learning. And so that's really what we've tried to do is create an environment. The first microschool that we did was me in my house with my son, Asher, and 6 of my friends' kids. So we were around my kitchen table. I did not have at the time a curriculum or a model to speak of. I had learned some things through the process of doing that code club after school, but it wasn't full curriculum. And so getting to the point where this could be school for these kids. So at first it was a group of homeschoolers kind of voluntarily associating. We've also morphed into partnering with charter schools or district schools. So this would be a group of virtual learners through either charter or district that are enrolled in full school, but they meet together in this micro school configuration. We've had other students that have, parents just pay for it. We have students that fund it through empowerment scholarship accounts or other such, state programs. There's actually multiple ways to do it, and we've become pretty agnostic, less excited about, one particular program or another. So as we look at different geographies, it's really just a question of how can we put together an environment that really empowers kids as learners, and in the process of that, how can we get it funded and paid for? So you found the Code Club website. That was the initial start there, prendacodeclub.com.
Oh, wow. Is there a new website?
So if you go to prendaschool.com, you'll see a lot more about what we're doing right now.
Okay, cool.
And and we continue, by the way, to sell Code Club as a service to public libraries all over the world. And kids are coming down to learn computer programming. That's a smaller portion. By this point, most of our time and efforts and resources are spent on Microschools. So you'll see all about Microschools at prendaschool.com. So I think I answered your question, Corey, but stop me if.
Yeah. So just for clarification, some people, talk about things like homeschool co-ops. Is this kind of like a homeschool co-op where, it's just families are getting together? And
it is. I would say, think of, if you have this whole spectrum, you have full unschool on one end of the spectrum where it's just like, it's all about empowerment and completely personalized, tailored to that child. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, a pretty disciplined or rigid, traditional model. There's kind of like, you step a little bit this way, it's a homeschool. It's still the co-ops are pretty flexible. The stories you'll hear from people who do co-ops, for example, we did this one for a month and then it wasn't quite working, or there was this falling out with the families. And so it moved into this other thing. It's very fluid. A Prenda microschool, for the most part, stays the same, for example, for a school year. So you choose that microschool, you kind of commit to each other. There's a guide that runs that microschool. This is a person that's screened by us, trained by us, supported by us. So there's a lot of time and effort that we put into helping that person be successful. And we can talk a lot about what that person does, because as I think everybody knows, the adult in the room physically there with the kids plays a really, really critical role to education. But what we're finding and seeing and kind of asserting is that it's hard in a very different way than what most people assume. And we actually tell these people, for example, not to be subject matter experts, not to deliver lectures, not to write lesson plans. So there's things that a traditional teacher wouldn't do or would do that we say don't do. But then there's a lot more about, you have 10 kids, you've got to know those kids inside and out. You've got to be able to motivate each one of them. So it's that really difficult work of clicking with another human being and helping them become the best version of themselves.
Yeah, so could you go over some of like the day-to-day of a Prenda microschool teacher? Sure. Is it more like student-centered where they're kind of guides rather than just lecturing the whole time? Or
yeah, there's no lectures. We call them learning guides. So they're not even called a teacher. And our guides play a very, very critical role. They are the ones that really build that strong connection with each child. So we provide a learning model we describe it as like scaffolding. It works to kind of take Prenda out of the box and use it and do nothing else to it. And we have some of our people that do that, but most people will take it and sort of apply their own interests, tailor it to work for not just them as the adult that's involved, but also for the group of kids that they're working with. And I can talk a little bit about kind of what that learning model is. We have 3 modes. One of them is Conquer mode. Conquer is where kids work on core academic skills at their own pace. So this would be, if you've heard of blended learning, tools like, or concepts like mastery-based learning. We use other people's tools for the most part for Conquer mode. So this is, imagine a group of 4th and 5th graders working on Khan Academy. They're all at a different point depending on what they understand. So it's all very mastery-driven. They'll set a daily goal for themselves and report that out loud to their group. and then just work on it until they learn what they need to learn for that day. There's a lot of mutual celebration of success. There's a lot of commiseration and supporting each other when things are hard. As you guys know, the learning process is messy. It requires people to dig deep and face uncomfortable failure at a lot of moments. And so to create an environment where kids are able to do that, where they are excited to do that, to show up to school day after day and learn, that's a lot of our goal. And we don't believe that everybody starts as self-learners, but we do believe that humans can become self-learners. It's fascinating to bring them into this environment and see what happens inside of Concord.
So what does that transportation look like for most families? I would assume that it's different from family to family. Do people pretty much get microschools that are located real close so you can kind of walk to school, or is there like a parent?
Yeah, great question. In the early days, we had fewer microschools, so people were driving 20 minutes, to match up with each other. As density has increased, we've seen shorter commutes, and most of our microschools today are local, either a short drive or, for example, my daughter, who's a fourth grader this year, pre-COVID would ride her bike a quarter mile to a neighboring house. And Mary, the guide over there, is just an amazing person in our neighborhood, and her own daughter's in the class and son. So as my daughter goes over, she's part of this very hyper local kind of community-based group. And our goal is to facilitate that as much as possible, because we love these safe, hyper local connections.
And what's like the minimum number, Kelly? Like 5 kids?
5. Yes.
5. Okay.
5 at the minimum and 10 at the max.
Okay. So at 10, at 11, you say it's time to find another place that's nearby to that.
And what happens there, we've already seen this happen over the last couple of years, is it starts to feel like cellular division, right? One of the moms that was just sending
the scientist coming out.
There you go. Yeah, I didn't do bio, but oh no, my sensor just turned off. I didn't do biotech, but I wish I did. Now that we kind of need a vaccine. But anyway, yeah, you can imagine one of the moms is the guide, and she's the one that's really working with the group, and then one of the other moms is really like embracing it, seeing the change in her own child, getting excited about what can happen. And she then steps up and says the next year, hey, I'll open a class. And so then you have 20 kids instead of 10. And that's basically how the growth has been so far. It's been pretty local in these communities.
That's cool.
So something I was wondering, and a lot of times people will push back against private schools and charter schools, for example, just based on like alternatives to like teacher certification. How does that work with Prenda? And, how do you respond to any of those types of, maybe you guys do go through the traditional certification.
We don't. Sure. So but
yeah. How does that whole process look? And
I think with any certification question, education or otherwise, the question is, what skills and attributes are you looking for? And is there a way to somehow signal that or communicate? I think what we're doing with these learning guides is a departure enough from what a traditional teacher is strong at and what they're built for. That's not to devalue that at all. There's actually tons of need as we've looked at how to structure this. So for example, development of a curriculum and a learning model. We've hired several teachers that are working on that for us. How to train and support these learning guides and help them evolve in this process of working with kids on their education. There are several more special ed's all certified teachers for our team. So there's places where skill sets have, that people have figured these things out. So we're not, some people will look at these, crazy techies or something that are trying to just like automate away everything. That's in no way what we're trying to do. The goal here is to take what we have available and wherever we can find those skills. Several of our guides happen to be past classroom teachers, but more important than that is the willingness that they have to do this work of a guide, which it really is different than the work of a teacher.
Yes. So like, for example, if you have some like retired physicist or something that wants to go and teach, is it true that in Arizona that they wouldn't be necessarily qualified because they didn't go through the traditional route. And
no, Arizona's good on this. So even in a traditional, like even if you were at a charter school, or I think even a district school, the rule is just a bachelor's degree, and then you have to be able to show competence in whatever you want to teach. But for us, it's a little different. Our teacher structure looks more like an online school where we'd have those, quote, teachers of record that are not in person there with the kids. The person with the kids is a learning guide. It's a different role. It's a new thing. And the teachers were trying to really leverage that skill set in things like I talked about, curriculum design, special ed, intervention type models where you want to watch through data. You can see where all the children are in terms of their mastery, and then strategically intervene. And then the development and support of those learning guides is critical as well. So tons of places where like a professional educator is super, super critical to this model. It just doesn't look exactly the same as what you'll see in a traditional school.
Is there like an ideal student profile, Kelly?
Yeah, it's a good question. We thought there was, because you obviously will see things like, like autonomy is a concept that will show up, right? So people will immediately assume, okay, this needs to be the type of kid that you just sort of suggest something and they'll just run with it and get it done. Now I know a lot of kids in Prenda. I think we're over 800 students today. And I can tell you that they don't start out that way. I think they move towards that for sure as part of the group, but there's this missing thing. So a child and a computer can be really, really efficient, but it forgets about the human aspect of it and motivation and psychology. And so what we've really tried to do is fill in where that human gap was. The motivation and psychology is really like, how do I create the environment where a child will show up and they want to be there because they feel this connection to other humans. They feel empowered and encouraged and supported by a loving guide, an adult in their life who's vested in them, who cares. And you put all that together, now you have this recipe, right? The computer still is better at giving a tailored lesson to 10 different kids or 30 different kids, right? There's no way a human can simultaneously give 30 different lessons. A computer can do that easily, but what a computer can't do is help those 30 kids, or in our case, 10 kids, care, right? Like how do they feel invested, and how do they want to learn what's in front of them? So what we've really been able to do is build a culture and it really relies on finding the right people as learning guides that step up, deliver great educational experiences. And then you have these environments that are really powerful. It's like, it almost feels like magic to walk into these places, because you look at these kids and the light in their eyes, it's just like, it's shining. It's like, I'm here, I want to learn, I'm engaged. It just feels very different than I think a lot of people's perception.
Would you say that that's one of the major improvements in education that Prenda's been able to accomplish, is the tailoring? Or like what are some of the
the tailoring was there already. I actually don't feel like that's necessarily. Now we've supplemented that. Corey's earlier question I didn't really finish answering, but we've built Conquer Mode, which is these like tailored lessons in math and English. But on top of that, there's Collaborate Mode. That's a facilitated group activity. Everybody's doing hands-on science experiments or teaching each other about history. There's Create Mode, where it's teams of 2 doing projects together. And that those things bring it to life in a way that feels very different. So I think if I had to distill it down, I think the real difference here is a culture and an environment. It's a place where, I mean, really a lot of homeschoolers, like you probably have homeschoolers watching right now that would say, of course, like we've been doing this forever. And I think that's true. I think their friends are saying, yeah, but you're some sort of, like organized, dedicated person who's willing to do it. Like me as a parent, that doesn't feel accessible to me. And so what Prenda's trying to do is take a lot of what the homeschool / alternative educators, there's lots of good stuff that has happened, try to package it in a way that really can be available to lots more kids.
So you said you took some, you have some students that use the Education Savings Accounts program in Arizona as well, right?
Yep.
So I'm wondering, so essentially this is almost like a form of homeschooling that's funded through an education savings account.
In that context,
Are there when you accept it, the education and savings accounts funding, I know some homeschoolers are concerned that, well, when you start accepting the funding, then comes the government encroachment.
Sure.
Is there anything that you've seen any different as when you accept students who use
yeah, so all of our students, for example, take the state tests. That's a place where some parents will just say it's out of hand, not going to happen. What I found is that most people's problem with it, though, is less about the idea of a test or even like a standard, like having some set of knowledge that we want or skills that we think kids should learn. It's not that specifically that a lot of parents really get annoyed with. It's the way it's done and sort of this high stakes, high pressure. We only care about one thing, and the kids feel that, internalize it. And at the end of the day, you have these kids who are, like can't fall asleep at night. And they're worried about, the test. And so what we've tried to do is take all of that off. Growth mindset, for example, is built into everything we do. So really working on not dwelling on some sort of, like arbitrary grade at this particular time. Your understanding is here. Here's where you are every day, and growth is available to you as a learner. And so the message, being able to send that message over and over again as part of this culture has felt very empowering. And I've talked to many parents that kind of started out with that skepticism, like, well, what is the government requirement going to be? How is that going to look? And instead it's like, oh, it actually doesn't, it feels very different. It's a different culture. Yes, we're aligned to standards. Yes, we're taking tests, but we're not doing it in a way that, that feels so high pressure that it kind of feels perceived harm,
right. And just to incorporate some audience questions, I see Tori Sledge has added one about, you were talking a little bit about tech that was used. He wants to know if you don't mind answering, what tech have you incorporated, maybe either just with Prenda overall or just an individual,
Yeah. So tech shows up in lots of places in our organization, but I think the one that's probably the most salient here is what do the kids experience? Prenda has created a web application. So the kids are on a Chromebook. They log in and call it Prenda World. It's kind of a fun way to keep track of goals and accountability and for the kids to own their learning. So the scaffolding that I kind of alluded to earlier, that's all done through software that we've created. Now, as part of that, there will be, I'm going to do a lesson in Lexia or Zern or some other software. There's all these great tools out there for personalized learning. So wherever possible, our goal was to not recreate other people's work. So we link out to and incorporate. What's missing there a lot of times is just having sort of a unified framework for a kid to be able to see and then share with their parents, here's where I'm at, overall, and I can see my progress. So we've built tools kind of around those other things to allow, allow self-learning to progress and goal setting and things like that. Kids take to Chromebooks very well, and as you guys probably know, they're not expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a nice option as far as that goes. You get them for like $200-$300, right? They're pretty cheap, so that's good.
So obviously everyone's been talking about COVID-19 and its effects on the education system overall. You wrote an article pretty recently on how COVID could be education's or just in general a Sputnik moment. Could you talk a little bit about, what some of the thoughts that you had in that piece?
Oh yeah, Corey, you shouldn't ask questions like this. It's filling me with delight. Obviously, I care enough about these ideas to write an article, and I'd happily talk about it. I mean, basically, I've played back. My dad was born in 1957, which was the year Sputnik flew overhead in the U.S. And this was, you guys remember, early space age kind of moment. So if you've studied the history of this, it was terrifying, right? Like students in elementary school would hide under their desks on a regular basis for these drills. Like if Russia can send this little dot across space, then they can send a missile across space and they can blow us up. And so it was this really scary moment, I would say akin to kind of what our children are feeling right now, right? With COVID, it's a scary time. But the flip side of it, and what I tried to say in this article, is that there was this sense of responsibility and encouragement that came with this. You had the president of the United States really imploring the children of the world to to study math and study science and care about these things, not because of some grade, but because your country needs you. And it's time to step up. And you saw a response to it. I think I have some of the data in this article, but it was fascinating to see this bump in scientists and engineers who went on to help, for example, the Apollo programs and landing people on the moon and some of the great things that happened after that. And so what I'm hoping for is that the time will come where, where people will see this, and instead of saying, oh, this is awful, like I'm rewatching like this Netflix series for the third time, it's like for our kids to say, wow, like the world needs me to figure out how the human body responds to flu viruses, right? And new strains, and how do vaccines even work? And what is the deal with testing, and what is an antibody, and all these things that have kind of entered our general consciousness. I want a generation of learners that will step up and ask those questions, not just for the sake of knowing them, but for the sake of doing something about it. And there's this great article Mark Andreessen wrote recently about being builders and emerging as builders as a society. And for me, that's very, very connected to the idea of learners, right? A learner is somebody who learns not just to, feel smarter than someone else. It's to dig in and use it and contribute in some way. And so this generation, I've worked with enough of these kids now that I have no question about their capability. And my goal is to just help them get to that point where they see that and they make that choice for their life to go on and choose to learn, choose to be a learner, choose to be a builder, engineer us out of these problems in the future, because we need it more than ever.
So I had a question about, you said the microschools with Prenda are between 5 to 10 students on average, right?
Yep.
Is there, like what's your theory behind, why that's like a good number? Is that just kind of how people tend to, collaborate with one another? Is that kind of just how it's kind of spontaneously worked, or is there some type of,
Yeah, I cannot claim.
What's the science behind that, Kelly?
I have no research to cite, although people have told me there actually are some numbers on both ends of that. Really, I can tell you we worked with a lot of rural communities in our code clubs, and then again with Microschools. Love rural communities. We had some code clubs where we could only get like 2 or 3 kids, and it just never quite got to that level of engagement and enthusiasm. So I would watch the engagement over lots of these, and we ended up actually getting a grant from the federal government to do code clubs in rural libraries. So it's fascinating to have the sample size, and where they could get to 5, it just felt like they came alive. There was this enough of a shared enthusiasm for learning to code that human factor worked. And so people would kind of engage with each other. They'd come back and bring their friends. When we got less than that, 4 kids and then somebody's absent, and it starts to feel like, oh, this isn't really a place where learning. So it's all finicky. I totally, could it be 4? Yes. Could it be 6? Yes. I'm not going to like die on the battlefield over any of these numbers. On the 10 side, this is when we get debated a lot, because our best guides are in high demand, right? You can imagine as these social networks evolve, people are like, oh, so-and-so's a guide. Like, I love her. My kids went to her for piano. We know her really well. Like, please let us in. And she says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm already at 10 and I'm booked up. So we've had actually quite a bit of pressure on this. We've made exceptions a couple times and sort of dabbled with it, but I'll tell you, you get a little bit above 10 and instead of individuals, it's like you see a group. And when you see a group, it's a really different feeling. There was one day with Code Club where my buddy Andy, who was helping me with it, didn't come, and I think we had some teen volunteers and they didn't come. And so I was in charge by myself as the only adult, and there were 57 kids. And I remember being like, nope, like I can't do this again myself. And I will never put anyone else in this situation. But you get 10 and it's, you can create that environment, and it's scalable, right? It's easy to find a physical space in a house that can have 10 kids, for example. It's easy to find a group of 10 that can form. So it's partly practical. But I'd say the part of it that's closest to science is that feeling of switching over from seeing individuals to seeing a group.
Have you guys ever heard about, I don't know where I heard this, but that people like on average tend to think in sevens, or that's like kind of their memory capacity. It's
I've heard that before. That's why phone numbers are 7. Is that?
Yeah.
maybe like 5 to 10 is like in that range.
Yeah, we're going for 7. 7 was my first. It was my first micro school with 7 kids, and it was a blast.
Do any individual teachers, you said some like parents can say like, oh, I want this particular guy. Did any teachers say like, come on, I can handle 20, just give me 20?
Yeah. Yep. We have some that actually are doing, so what they're doing is like splitting it up. So they're doing like multiple sessions. And it's hard, right? I think that's a harder group, but you can do it. And they end up making substantially more money than a public school teacher would. I mean, so that works out well for them. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. And most of by far, the majority of people working with us, this isn't their goal is not to maximize their income. It's to do something meaningful during the time when their kid is at school, by definition, right? Because they're with their kid, and be able to create something that's valuable in their community and help out. So the money's nice, but that's not the main thing they're optimizing.
So you have 800 or so, about 800 kids right now using Prenda. And so at least you have 80 micro schools.
Yeah, that's right. I think 110, I want to say, that are live right now. And then we've got some more getting ready to go for the fall.
And you're nationwide at this point, or where?
We are technically, although Arizona is the place where we've by far focused the most. So almost all of those students are in Arizona. We'll have, one group in Spokane and one group in Bend, Oregon, and one group in Salt Lake City. But they tend to be, these are people who have kind of just found us through our efforts. We haven't done any sort of marketing or storytelling outside of that. And part of that is, understanding new regulatory environments and just making sure that we can enter. Our goal is to make this, free to parents. So to be able to do that means you have to understand how dollars flow through these systems. And we know some places, but we don't have a strong footing outside of Arizona at this point.
That's great, though. It's a great start, right?
Absolutely.
So, very cool. So Kelly, what are some of the criticisms that you get or that you hear micro schools getting? I guess I could come up with a couple. How would you respond to this? But why don't you tell me some of the better ones and or more valid ones and how you respond to those?
I think you're going to hear a lot of the same questions as people will ask homeschoolers. So you'll get these stories where somebody corners your kid at a party and starts asking them math facts, like see if they know anything, like because they don't. People can be a little bit rough on homeschoolers or people who do things differently. So same types of questions, right? Like if you're used to seeing school a certain way, it's like, well, are these kids learning anything? Like, how do we know that this is even working? And so I just invite them in. I mean, I just say, come look and talk to these kids. It's actually fascinating to see a child that wants to learn. It's something we're just not used to encountering. I think it's like been so long, you go back in time and you see examples of this around today, but for some reason, not as many. There was this boy in one of these classes that, he had been in trouble. He had some behavior problems in his elementary school. He came into this class almost as a sort of like a last resort, like instead of getting kicked out of school. And this guy, he decided, I'm going to learn stuff. And he took on math in Khan Academy. He mastered all of 6th grade math in 2 months. So it was like, obviously, like the view that everyone had about him was false, right? Like that was like disproven immediately. And then he keeps going. He's well into 7th grade, year and a half worth of academic progress in just a few months. And it's like, now wait a minute, like what is going on here? And it just raises, like, people that see that will start asking some questions. So, and it's not that way for everybody. We have kids that, everybody's going to move at a different rate. Each human is different. Our goal is not to have everybody at a certain point at a certain time, because that would feel like the factory model that I think we're trying to kind of avoid. But I think what we do see is once they make that decision to learn and they know how to learn, there's significant progress that's made. It's really cool to see. So that would be one of the potential criticisms. And
so
go ahead.
I think you answered this already. I mean, you said that, families can use their empowerment scholarships accounts to use to attend Prenda schools. Can Prenda schools also come together as a public charter school, or is
so like I said, we've partnered with schools, either district or charter. So we don't have a horse in the race necessarily. But for example, what that would look like is these kids would be they would be enrolled as virtual students. All the academics tracked that way. So, they take the test, that's all reported through the Department of Ed like any other school. But then physically they're meeting in person and having a great experience. So yeah, we have multiple ways to accomplish that. And like I said, we know Arizona better than we know other places, but we're right now looking for ways to sort of introduce this model and make it available to as many kids as possible for free.
So it seems to me like one of your competitive advantages, at least in theory, is that Prenda doesn't have to spend as much on capital costs and facilities, at least in theory, and that perhaps you might be able to reward teachers more for a job well done. Do you see that a lot of your teachers are making more than they could have made in the traditional?
It's tricky because there's haircuts in the way that the funding goes. So before we even see anything, so we give 60% of our money directly to the guides that run things. That's our kind of target number. I think the number in a traditional, if you just looked at the National Center for Education Statistics, you can do some rough math. I think it's much less than that. So by percentage, it's a lot more. I think the problem is we're already so haircut in terms of like the funding that's available to us. So there's a lot of funding being used for other things that we don't necessarily get to see. And that means that per, teacher per year, and it's not a teacher, it's a learning guide, but for that person per year, it's actually less in total. It's more per hour. We do fewer hours. It's
but
less.
Then like half the students or like a quarter of the students too.
And
right?
for 10 students. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's some differences. It's hard to make an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, because you're only getting at
least
you're getting a quarter ADM, but that's multiplied by 0.85.
Yes.
And so that's your best number, right?
You know this world, Matthew.
Yeah.
That's your best number.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely have some haircuts on.
But that's right. To Corey's point, I mean, we've tried to design this to where there's as little waste as possible, And someone asked about tech. I mean, for example, there's huge administrative burden that a lot of traditional schools face that frankly could be done by computers. And so our goal is to try to, eliminate anything that a computer can do. We want computers doing it so that we can allocate human talent to the real tricky parts of, interfacing with these kids and solving the puzzle of a human being, which is that's hard. And I don't see computers being anywhere near ready to solve those problems.
Yeah, I think the point that you made where like 60% of the resources are going to the teachers is a good one and something that one of us should write about, either Matthew, myself, or someone else watching. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you take like an average school size, class size of 20, I mean, maybe it's higher. This is a lower bound estimate of the average school, class size in the U.S., 15,000 per student. So, about $300,000 per classroom. Average teacher makes about 60. That's only 20% of the resources going to the actual teacher. And some people say, oh, average class size higher, then that means the 20% will even be lower than.
Right. Another way to put that is what's 60% of 300K? I mean, it would be great to be able to pay. And obviously that simplifies things, and people have to pay for buildings and they have to pay for, there's administrative layers and things, but it's been liberating in some ways for us to be able to design some pieces of this from the ground up and not have to inherit, cost structures that may cripple that ability to really deliver directly to the kids.
Yeah, those are disadvantages of the system, right? Those extra layers of administration, those extra costs. And by the way, we're not even taking into account the facilities, because in large part, the majority of those dollars don't get comprehended in the numbers that were just cited, because they go through different mechanisms. Like in Arizona, it's the School Facilities Board. A lot of that money comes in through different avenues. So
you guys know more about this than I do. Yeah.
Anyway, all that to say that 60%, a 3x per student or per teacher is pretty darn good. So, but yeah, I feel an op-ed coming on.
Uh-oh.
Right?
Yeah, you got to give us your data so we can cite it. I mean, the whole idea, we've made this argument in other articles that school choice could benefit teachers too, in a lot of different ways, because, labor market competition is, in theory, good for, the employees themselves. Could ratchet up compensation, but it also could lead to more autonomy and more, smaller class sizes, like what we're seeing with the Prenda Microschools. So
it's actually been really fun to meet people that have, in some way, shape, or form, been part of the system before, and to see them, really excited about what's possible, just to remove some of the. And yeah, I agree. I think my worldview is much less about the people, and it's much more about the structure, right? And so if you have people who feel limited, like why do they feel limited, and is there a way to kind of do it differently so that they don't have those limitations? I think it's pretty amazing to see what they'll do with it.
I was also interested, you said you like 110 microschools going on at the moment. Have you seen any trends, like in, some microschools will have like a certain focus, whereas another one will focus on a, whatever. Is there like differences in specialization between schools? Have you any comments on what you've witnessed?
It's been interesting. So we didn't, I think I kind of had an idea that might happen when we started out, but we didn't do anything to facilitate it. So it's just really been market driven, just kind of see what people bring. And the area that's been maybe the most fun is the rural areas. Again, we have these communities. There's towns in Arizona that I've lived here a long time and I've never even heard of. And so it's like, oh, wow, like what's going on in this area? And there's kids in these microschools that are, banding together to like farm and take care of, raise animals, and just dig into different activities and pursuits as part, just integrating it as part of their day. So they still do all of the, math and English, science and social studies. The core academics are there, but then on top of that, their projects might involve all kinds of things. And that's been really fun for me to see how the guides kind of bring their own unique perspective and interests. The kids bring their interests, and it comes together to form something different in every situation.
So kind of take on their own personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's cool.
So how has Prenda been adapting to the COVID-19 closure, and what changes have you seen with your organization and maybe even elsewhere? Just any.
The biggest one by far is interest is through the roof. So we've had tons of people come to us. The way I've described it, as I've talked to various friends, is you can imagine a kind of a distribution of interest, right? And Prenda's like a line over on one end of that distribution, which is the people who are like ready right now to make a jump. And then there's people who are like, never will I leave my neighborhood school. And there's people kind of in the middle saying, hey, that's a little weird. That's not for me, but cool, whatever. So what I've seen is those people have all seemed to shift a little bit, like as they've, not tons. It's not like all those people are ready today to sign up for a microschool or to homeschool. But what you're seeing is everybody's a little bit more open to it. They're, they have their kids home. They're experiencing some of it. And part of that reaction is like, oh, there's something interesting here. Like, I actually like being part of this and involved. Some people will say things like, I think that I didn't realize exactly what was going on, in my classroom. And now it's like right in front of me. So they can kind of see places where it could be better. And then there's people who are just like, I can't wait for school to open and my kid can go back there. And that's all fine. I think those people will be more inclined. And what we've seen is some of those people have kind of crossed over that line. So we had a whole bunch of people that were talking to us about starting a microschool or being part of a microschool in August when, the next school year starts. And those people with a shutdown are just like, hey, let's just enroll right now. Let's do it. So we've seen actually a big bump just over the last little bit as parents have sort of encountered this and banded together in neighborhoods in a way that's pretty interesting. And Kayla's here. Thanks, Kayla. How are you? I'm glad it's working out for you. And she's talking about transitioning. One of the things that we've seen that makes it kind of interesting or easy to transition, and obviously we'd prefer a microschool. We really like the in-person attributes of being together in person. But these kids, they know how to learn. So they're used to a flow where they set their goals every day. They report their goals. They do a collaborative activity led by one of the students. They do their projects. They want to engage with each other. And so now they've got that, plus they've got mastery of some of these basic technologies. And so putting that together at home with their parents is actually less stressful. It's been a relatively easy transition. I know there's still places, and I hear about them, where our guides are saying, I wish we could do this, or I wish this could go. We've tried to supplement some of that and create kind of virtual experiences that everyone is invited to. But many of our guides, just like Kayla was talking about, have been able to jump on Zoom, engage with the parents, work together in a way that that unlocks some of the learning still, even in these challenging times.
So you said you've seen an increase in the demand of people reaching out. Do you have any statistics, like what percentage of an increase? I mean,
yeah, I think we had, I'm going to be, I don't want to get in trouble giving, my team's probably, somebody's watching this from my team and they're like, you got the numbers wrong. I want to say we were 700 students at the beginning of shutdown. And I think our number right now might be 850. So just to give you a little bit, 150 students on top of 700, that's a pretty big.
In what, 5-6 weeks,
in
right?
6 weeks. Yeah.
That's
Now you got to remember, a lot of those people probably would have started in August anyway, but because of everything, it's like, might as well just do it now.
I mean, it's a little bit bigger than this survey that I did, unscientific. You probably can't see it really well, but
yeah, I'm looking.
I asked a lot of my followers, what school were you going to before shutdown, and where do you plan to go after? And so I looked at everyone who said traditional public school before. It looks like 15% of them. And that's around, you said around a 21% boost from the 7 to the 850 is about a 21% change.
You didn't have microschools on your list. You probably would have seen that.
Yeah, should have. But maybe they're thinking, but the respondents are thinking of Prenda as kind of like a homeschool co-op situation, even though it's not the same thing. But it's good to know that my numbers are kind of where your numbers were. Obviously, my poll is not scientific in any means, but I mean, it's just not representative. But it's the only information we really have, besides what you gave us with your
it's an interesting time. Absolutely. And I think it just, in discussions, it's been interesting to me to talk to friends of mine that are much farther away from that, ready to jump kind of edge on the distribution. And even them, they're kind of like, hey, we did this thing together. It was interesting. Or my kid was doing these worksheets and it was obvious that they weren't learning anything from those worksheets. It was just busy work for them. So we just ripped them up and did something different. And so having those just little moments where parents start to think more about, I have this post that I will be, that I've been sharing called the red pill and the blue pill for education. And this idea of what is school even for, right? And you see parents, I think forever it was the blue pill was just kind of, you just do what they tell you to do. And you trust that if you do, you do all your assignments and you take the tests and you kind of move from 4th grade to 5th grade to 6th grade, eventually this massive escalator will spit you out somewhere good, right? I'll end up with a job, I'll end up with a good college degree. And it's been true. I mean, I think there's actual evidence, people who have a college degree make more money, for example. But I think what more and more parents are starting to see is that it's not actually the escalator that's the thing, right? And we're giving people this red pill saying, what if it was about learning? And what if the main goal of all of this was to help your child learn and care about learning? We go back to this ancient Roman Plutarch quote that's I'm sure you guys have seen before, but the mind is not a vessel to be filled, it's a fire to be kindled. And I think so much of what people's experience has been is here, pour knowledge into your head, remember this, hopefully long enough to spit it back on the April test. We're saying it's actually something very, very different. It's light that fire. Yeah, Kayla is talking about red pill family. You meet these people that buy that and that see the world that way. one, it's liberating in a way, I think, akin to the movie, right? Where I'm referencing the Matrix here, but where you're just like sort of, it's scary to take it, but it's also, once you do it, it's like amazing to see like, oh, this is actually not this mysterious black box that I don't understand. It's about me and my brain and my child and their brain, and what do they love and what do they want to love and what do they want to learn. My son right now is learning guitar with a lot of his extra time. My daughter is working on ukulele, and what else was she doing? Getting into like all these weird science projects she was finding off the internet. Yesterday, she was showing me how she can make an egg bouncy somehow because of she like, I come home and she's like learned something that I don't know, and it's just the best. Like, I love seeing kids really engage and take ownership of learning, whatever that looks like, right? That can be a number of different things. But if you think about what's really going to help them in their life, and this is the red pill moment, right? Is I believe that being a learner is going to be much, much more valuable to you than just following through, you know. And I'm speaking as somebody who got straight A's, and I was the salutatorian of my school, right? But it took me a long time to realize that all of the skills that I had developed to do all those things were actually not helpful to me. It was like, it was actually a big catastrophe of identity that happened in grad school, where I had to say, oh, like, not only do I not know the material, I don't even know how to learn. And I had to redo my whole identity in a way that was painful and hard. I want to change that and give that to a kid from the very beginning, and let them see themselves as capable of learning anything and having that audacity and confidence to just, you know, tackle a project. They need adults to be next to them, caring about them. They need a group that reinforces themselves, reinforces all of that environment. But that's what we're really trying to do with empowering learners at Prenda.
That's a great way to wrap up, actually. A great closing statement, Kelly. We appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else? Well, let me ask you this. In conclusion, where can people find you and Prenda? We saw the website earlier, but let's
and this is my personal Twitter. I'm not great on Twitter, but if you guys want to engage directly, at Kelly Smith NAZ, and prendaschool.com or at Prenda Learn would be great for finding us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's always Prenda Learn. So yeah, check us out. We'd love to meet you. It sounds like, just from the comments and watching these come through, there's great people out there with all kinds of enthusiasm for these ideas. So I would love to engage and work with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on today, Kelly. We appreciate your time.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Cool. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us. And to the audience, thanks for coming out. Thank you for being engaged with the comments and questions. And until next time, this is the Educational Freedom Institute podcast.
See ya. Have a good day.